it wasn't until I started really getting into punk and hardcore music that I started to have these ideas challenged. And I'd say just from like a critical point of view, where like when I started listening to music that critiqued systems, is when I was like, oh, like this actually might not be like a universal truth. This might not be a thing that's real. So there's this band, Youth of Today, that had a song called No More. And I'm not sure if you know anything about punk or hardcore. Do you have any connection to it?
A little bit, but it was just I was coming into my 20s when it was
Yeah.
getting its movement. I started working.
Um, so this
And that's
band,
when I lost my music when I was had to go to work all day. But anyway, go ahead.
and there was no Spotify back then.
I know.
So this band called Youth of Today wrote a song called No More, and I can't even tell you like the impact it had on me. I was like, oh, because I'd also thought that it was about health, and I didn't even think about animal welfare at all. I was like, oh, you're just like kind of this hippie kind of health person. Like, okay. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think negatively of
Yeah.
it. I just kind of thought like, oh, and I also kind of thought it's like, oh, these are people who are just trying to be weirdos, like, like stand out. It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever negative idea that you have as a high school kid. I wasn't against it, but I just thought it was a weird thing. I got my hands on this record called We're Not in This Alone by this band called Youth of Today. And this song was about had more to do with animal welfare. And then later on, there was a band called Instead that had a song called Feel Their Pain. And I was like, oh, shit, this is a different thing. And I hadn't really just thought about it. So that's what got me interested in the idea of being vegetarian, and more from a like, not at all from health, but more from a how you walk on the earth,
Yeah.
and kind of being spiritually sound. I don't mean it in a religious way, but do you walk in a heavy way or a light way? And I was thinking about it, and I did the thing. You're like, I was in high school. I was at my parents' house.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how they would react to it. I was kind of half-heartedly interested in it. But right when I was graduating from high school, there was this band from Syracuse, New York called Earth Crisis, which is like, what a name, right? And they put out this record, and they were a vegan band. And I had heard of veganism just kind of like almost like it was like some weirdo cult.
Yeah.
And they
It
came,
is.
maybe it is. They came out with this record called Firestorm. And then they later on came out with a record called Destroy the Machines at full length. And I was completely like flabbergasted by the way they were talking about it. The movement in punk and hardcore at that time had gone from vegetarian to vegan, and I was just like totally captivated. Like, yes, this is the thing. And it was a life-changing moment. This was the kind of early-ish 90s. I'd say like maybe I think I kind of made the change around the mid 90s, and initially made the change was doing it for a couple of years, and then went back to vegetarianism, then went back to eating meat, then eventually came back to it later on in the early 2000s. But that idea that government and systems can kind of keep an idea going, and even just that idea, going back to what I was initially saying, it's like animals are put here by God. It's like when you're young and you learn that idea, just like you'd said, like teach them young, like some
Yeah.
people are going to think like bologna with Miracle Whip is like that's normal, so they'll be socialized to it, and they'll
Yeah.
be like that's my comfort food. Like a comfort idea that I think can help people short circuit their thinking about it is like, oh, animals are like a pear, or animals are something that are grown on the planet for us,
Yeah.
and that kind of human centric idea that everything is there for us to consume, how it's systems are going to hold things like that in place until there's an economic reason to not hold it in place,
Mm.
like the growth of the plant-based industry and plant-based restaurants, which you are such a forerunner in. But that idea that all of that stays in place because it's convenient for economics, and there's all of these different ways that people get taught that eating animals is fine, it's no big deal. But it's people like you, or like the people in Youth of Today, or the people in Earth Crisis, or Instead, who wrote these songs that literally changed thousands and hundreds of thousands of people thinking, because they're like never had experienced someone saying it in that way, or those authors that you were reading.
Yeah.
And that idea of like, if you see something's wrong and you really look into it and you really feel it, you should talk about it, and you should do something about it. You should start a restaurant, you should start a band, because that idea of leadership and really I don't mean taking an obnoxious stand, because even listening to your story where it's like, well, maybe one day a week you can eat like this. So I don't mean an obnoxious stand of being like, fuck you if you don't believe what I'd say, but more of a like, hey, the more you know, the more you can make an informed choice. So much of what stood out to me about your story is like, it's like, although you didn't grow up with punk and hardcore, your story is like the punkest story, because you're like when the chef walked out and you're like, oh no, I'll be fine. That's like to me
Yeah.
the punkest thing. You're like, now I'm the chef.